Lots of room. He's 40. Like a rocket. Look at Jeanty go. Breaks a tackle. He's 20. He's 10. He's touchdown.
Here's a long run. Oklahoma State gonna do it again, and guess who? Big O to the house.
Milroe gonna run it again. Got a lane. Kicked in the turbo. Milroe. Goodbye. Touchdown, Bama.
Pump fake. Cook. End zone. Caught. Touchdown. Luther Burden the third.
This is the CFF Site's Week 5 College Fantasy Football Show. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF Site. And Week 5, wow, Georgia, Bama, just wow. In a game that looked like it wasn't going to be a contest early on. Wow, what a game we got this past weekend. Wow, that was, that was something. Incredible game. Entertaining game. And that's why we love college football right there. That game, that environment, that ending lived up to the hype. All you could ask for and more. Fantastic. And hopefully we get more of that in the coming weeks. But for now, we turn our attention to college fantasy football. And stick around because at the end, we're going to get into how Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty's 2024 season is starting off compared to that historic 1988 season of Barry Sanders, and where does it stand right now through 4 games. But let's just kind of start at the top. We'll go in order of some of these games. I'll skip around a little bit, but right now, let's just start at the academies. Army and Navy both have a viable and very appealing fantasy options at quarterback. Bryson, Dailey for Army, Blake Horvath at Navy have been tearing it up, and they are legitimate top 20 to 30, maybe even top 15 quarterbacks on a weekly basis right now. Undoubtedly 2 waiver wire guys for most people in most leagues right now. But I think you've got 2 gems right there in those guys. Miami. We focused on Damian Martinez a little bit last week. He had the 3 touchdowns, not a lot of yards. I'm just going to say right now, Damian Martinez, based on the type of league that I like to play, full FBS, 12-team format, maybe 14. I'm not sure Damian Martinez is for me. In a 12-team format, full FBS, I'm probably clearing roster space by this point to make room for a few players that have already emerged. But I know, look, one of the great things about college fantasy football, so many different formats, so many different types you can play in. That's why I never just go out there and say, hey, this guy's a drop, this guy's an ad, this guy's a start, this guy's a bench. There are so many different formats. You really have to understand the format you're in before you make those decisions to drop guys like Damian Martinez sometimes. Look at I remember way in the years of when Sammy Watkins started off as a freshman at Clemson. I'm going way back for some of you guys who have been playing college fantasy football for a while. Watkins had a slow week 1, took a flyer on him in the first week on draft day. I was like, I need to get one of these week 1 breakout stars. I dropped Sammy Watkins, and he turned out to be a fantasy star that season. So sometimes you lose one because you jump. The thing is, with the waiver wire, you try to jump on a player early, and sometimes it does come at the expense of dropping a really good player. And sometimes that's the risk that you have to take. So there's risk in holding on to a player too soon. There's also risk in jumping off of a player much earlier than you anticipate, because there is a fear that he could go off later and could turn it on as the season progresses. There may be a ton of players like that this year, and we're going to get into a few of them because I know I mentioned where Byron Brown, quarterback USF, the schedule looks really good the rest of the way, but you've got a bye week. But the rest of the schedule looks great. But for you guys that have him up until this point, you're like, I need him now. I needed him like 2 weeks ago. So I get if you're dangling him in some type of a trade, but if you're out there and you're a front runner right now, this is where you can buy low on players that may be the difference makers at the end of the year. So I don't like to just I don't like to just say, hey, hold this person, buy this person, sell this person, trade this person. You really have to understand the specs of your league, but I'm giving it to you a little bit more in context right there. Damian Martinez, 12-team full FBS. Not for me. Not for me. UAB, running back, Lee Beebe. I mentioned a week ago that he was a hold for me. Turned out had a pretty good game this past weekend. 15 carries, 82 yards, and a touchdown against Navy. One of those players where if he sticks, he's going to have a really good schedule at the end of the year. But buyer beware. Tulane and Army are on deck. UAB does not look that good. So you are taking a chance with Lee Beebe. I can see some guys jumping off of him, but I do like that schedule of UAB at the end of the year, and I think Lee Beebe could be a good buy or a good hold for you guys long term. I mentioned USF quarterback Byron Brown. I'm still on that boat. I mean, look, USF is 2-3. They don't look as good as I think I expected them to be. I thought they would be improved this year. I'm not really seeing that. They have played, a decent schedule. They played Miami. They played Tulane. They haven't had the easiest schedule. Their better days are ahead of them. No doubt about that. But some of you guys are getting desperate, and I get it. You can only wait around so long. And so I know there's a lot of you guys getting antsy with Byron Brown. May not be willing to risk it and wait it out with him, but I really feel good about him at the end of the year. Let's go over to NC State. Wide receiver Casey Concepcion. 4 catches, 4 yards, and a touchdown this past weekend. He had 3 TDs in the opener, so this was the first TD he had scored, I think, at least receiving TD since the 3 touchdown performance in opener against an FCS opponent. He's the one that he's not for me either right now. I'm sorry, but you just can't give me 4 catches for 4 yards. His yardage total has not been that good. I'd probably be off of Casey Concepcion at this point. Kansas State quarterback. And look, maybe what I'm doing is a service for some of you guys, because I spoke about Avery Johnson last week, quarterback of Kansas State. And he went off and had a 5 touchdown performance against Oklahoma State this past weekend. I was on the fence on whether or not I see any progression out of Avery Johnson. I'm still in that camp. But boy, I certainly helped you guys by kind of downplaying him last week. He busted out with a 5 TD performance against Oklahoma State, which, let's go to Oklahoma State, because as of right now, sure, you have Byron Brown. You have Caden Salter in this conversation. But for me, Ollie Gordon II right now is the bust of the year. Because I don't think that Oklahoma State running game is that good. I thought they would be at least somewhat better against Kansas State. His yardage totals were okay. I'm just not feeling Ollie Gordon II. Man, he is that's a tough one to drop. You invest probably a top 5 pick in Ollie Gordon this year. And some of you guys I know are holding on to that roster spot. And I don't blame you. I think if I drafted Ollie Gordon in redrafts, I'd be holding him too, for the fear that we would see the 2023 Ollie Gordon break loose at some point. But man, when is it going to happen? It has to happen now, or it's never going to happen, right? Ole Miss Kentucky game, we got an upset this past weekend too. I mentioned I've been saying it for the last 2 weeks, that Jackson Dart, Henry Parrish, wide receiver Trey Harris, the best fantasy trio in the nation to have. And for the most part, 2 or 3 had a good game against Kentucky. Jackson Dart did not. But, that was really the first time Ole Miss was tested against a physical team all year. And I can't help but wonder, are we going to see something similar in this Ohio State-Iowa matchup this week. Not saying Iowa's going to win this game, but I'm really curious to see if they can kind of hit Ohio State with a couple of stiff jabs, make Ohio State see a physicality they haven't seen this year. And if so, how would the Buckeyes respond? Now, I think when you look at, or not think, but I know when you look at Ohio State's schedule, roster, to me, it's a better roster than Ole Miss. I don't see Ohio State walking into that trap. But that's what this week's Iowa-Ohio State game feels like to me. Kentucky, Ole Miss from week 5. I mentioned Bryson, Dailey, and Blake Horvath as quarterback must-adds at the beginning of the show. You've got to put Alonza Barnett the third up there for James Madison. 13 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I mean, look, I get sometimes you're a 1-week wonder, but is it really just a 2-week deal? That's a guy you can't risk keeping out on the waiver wire. He's posting difference-making numbers right now. Those 3 guys that I mentioned, Bryson, Dailey, Blake Horvath, Alonza Barnett, 3 waiver wire gems. Absolutely. If you need a decent waiver wire addition for the next couple of weeks, take a look at Sam Houston State, who is much improved. I think we mentioned this last year that there was a bunch of guys that seemed like they were going to take a lot of red shirts, take the year off to kind of get ready for 2024. Sam Houston State has been much improved this year. Hunter Watson, the quarterback, has posted back-to-back 100-yard rushing games. He's got 4 TDs in the last 2 weeks. And running back Jay Ducker, remember that name? Northern Illinois, Memphis. He's gotten some good work over the last 3 weeks. 14 carries, 69 yards, 3 TDs. 20 carries, 38 yards and a touchdown, and 15 carries for 148. He's getting some utilization in deep full FBS leagues. Those 2 guys may be worth a roster addition if you need depth at the position, because remember, there's a lot of bye weeks this week. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Strategy this year is a little different than it has been in years past because most teams, all teams, have at least 2 byes this year. And I just wonder if Sam Houston State quarterback Hunter Watson and running back Jay Ducker might be good, might offer good depth on your roster going into the middle weeks here of the season. And then another player that, not for me right now, and I'd be off too, is just Texas State running back Ismail Mahdi. I mean, this was a guy who had double-digit touchdowns last year, dynamic playmaker, just has yet to really get it going in this Texas State offense, at least scoring-wise this year. And I don't see where he's really much of a guaranteed start on a weekly basis. I threw Stone Earl, Marshall quarterback, into my top 25 last week, paid off. I just thought, given Marshall's schedule, they had they had an easy opponent in week 1. You don't really get to see too much. Virginia Tech, Ohio State, and a bye week in the ensuing weeks. You kind of forgot about what Marshall was. And then you look at the numbers, and I thought, I see this offense putting up some decent numbers coming out of these Power 5 matchups bye week. We've kind of forgotten about Marshall. I didn't let you forget about them. I think there's some decent ads on there. Stone Earl, I think, is a decent ad at quarterback. He's going to throw it around a lot. He's going to put some yards up he's going to post some rushing yards. And then Christopher Fitzpatrick as well. Right now, probably their best target on offense, or at least the wide receiver that has the most fantasy appeal right now on their roster. Let's go to the Western Michigan running back room, where Jalen Buckley had a big game in the opener of the season. And he was big and high up in our rankings. But then we haven't seen him for about 3 or 4 weeks. And all of a sudden now you're seeing Jaden Nixon go for 23, 146 and 1 and 17, 189 and 2. As long as Jalen Buckley is out, Jaden Nixon, for me, is a must start. San Diego State, another place where the schedule is working itself out now. The Aztecs are settling into conference play. What did we see? Schedule opens up. Marquez Cooper, 35 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown against Central Michigan last week. I think you'll see some good games out of him moving forward as well in that offense. Let's go to UNLV, sticking in the Mountain West, where Hajj-Malik Williams in 1 week has already made us forget about Matthew Sluka. Now, I know you Matthew Sluka owners haven't forgot about Matthew Sluka, but hopefully some of you guys went out there and grabbed Hajj-Malik Williams as soon as that news broke. And I remember when the news broke, the first thing I did was put Ricky White back into my top 25 for wide receivers. I thought that this move absolutely changed the dynamic of the offense in a better way from an overall scheme. It seems like that after 1 week, Hajj-Malik Williams, to me, looks much more dynamic than Matthew Sluka. So we'll see. The one thing that I will say, too, is don't sleep on the UNLV defense, especially if you're streaming defense special teams. They've been one of the better defenses this year. TCU, let's go there because, first of all, Jack Besh, forget that he's even listed as a tight end, designated tight end in Fantrax. Like, if you have him at tight end, what a steal you have, but it just is wide receiver. He's one of the best receivers in the country right now at posting numbers. Fantastic. But I think the one thing to really focus on with TCU at receiver, to me, feels like Eric McAllister is a better fantasy option right now than Savion Williams, who started really strong with that first game against Stanford. But to me, Eric McAllister feels like a better fantasy option than Savion Williams right now. Wake Forest, we know they lost that game at Louisiana or against Louisiana last week. The one thing that happened in that game was the one thing that I feared about Damon Claiborne going into this season. If you watched Wake Forest last year, you noticed that Tate Carney was utilized around the goal line. That didn't change. It doesn't look like it's going to change. Tate Carney, 3 one-yard plunges in that game against Louisiana, absolutely is going to vulture the goal line carries for Damon Claiborne. Oklahoma-Auburn, which I have to tell you, I missed that game as far as how I thought it would play out. I thought Oklahoma was going to gift a game to Auburn, much like Auburn gifted a game to Arkansas, starting a freshman quarterback on the road in the SEC. I thought Auburn, obviously they have issues at quarterback. I don't think Oklahoma's issues at quarterback are the same that Auburn's is. Oklahoma just doesn't have many playmakers in that offense. And I thought Auburn was going to be gifted a win by Oklahoma, and probably would have had Oklahoma's defense not made a play. And I did say last week that the quarterback position up until last week was pretty much the only position that was really, aside from that opener for Deion Burks, was the best player to have on the Oklahoma offense. It's still like that. But let's be honest. If Oklahoma's defense doesn't score, we're not talking as much as about Michael Hawkins today as we were, had they lost. I still think he's a viable option. I think as far as Oklahoma's offense is concerned, that's the one position, whether it's Arnold or Hawkins. I'm not even convinced that Hawkins is going to finish the year out. We'll see how it plays out. But for right now, I think you got a decent option. I think his ceiling's limited because I think the pieces around him right now are limited. And when I look on the other side of the ball at Auburn, I look at Keandre Lambert-Smith and just think, man, if they just had if they had a quarterback that was on the same page as some of their receivers, if they could somehow get that fixed, Keandre Lambert-Smith had a pretty decent season so far. I wonder how good his numbers actually could be if Auburn got smarter and more efficient quarterback play. USC, Wisconsin, just note there, 2 guys I know I've thrown out at flyers in some of our shows earlier in the year. It was nice to see both of those guys have 2 touchdown performances, and I'm talking about wide receiver Jacoby Lane of USC and Tawee Walker at Wisconsin. Let's go over to Duke. And I know I mentioned this where injuries in some kind, when there's a split backfield, injuries can really pay off for one guy. And that's what's happened with Star Thomas, who's been absolute fantasy gold ever since Jaquez Moore went down for an injury. And so we don't root for guys to get hurt. But I know a lot of you guys that scooped up on Star Thomas are just keeping your fingers crossed that Jaquez Moore stays sidelined for a few more weeks. Bowling Green, tight end, Harold Fannin. Again, I said it last week. Schedule opens up. This guy is a wide receiver one, playing tight end. Old Dominion last week. Bowling Green didn't play as well as I thought they would, but the offense was very good. And Fannin catches 12 passes for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bring on Mac play. Iowa State running back Abu Sama. I've already mentioned I was off the train on him. He runs for 101 yards on 11 carries in this win this past week against Houston for the touchdown. I would caution you on jumping back on that train. He had a 77-yard touchdown run. Take that one play out. He had 10 carries for 24 yards. I just don't think you're going to get consistency in there. Memphis, quarterback Seth Hennigan. Let's talk about him for a second, because last year in 13 games, he totaled 36 touchdowns, 13 passing, 4 rushing. Through 5 games this year, 7 passing touchdowns, 0 rushing touchdowns. He's only got a fifth of the touchdowns that he had last year. And the season is more, about 40% through. So that's a quarterback right now with his heavily invested. I think right now Memphis's touchdown ratio is 2-1 rushing. I think they have 14 rushing touchdowns as a team, 7 passing touchdowns as a team. That's not good if you have Seth Hennigan or have any pieces of that Memphis passing game. Arizona Tet McMillan. I only bring him up because Arizona, after that win this past week against Utah, they get a Texas Tech defense, which is one of the worst in the FBS at allowing 309 passing yards per game. I can't help but wonder, all you guys out there with Tet McMillan, if you're really, really licking your chops this week. I hard to not see him, Tet McMillan, being a top 5, top 3 wide receiver in my rankings this week without even really finishing the projections right now. I mentioned the UGA, the Georgia-Bama game at the top of the show. What a game. Still hard to believe that Ryan Williams is a 17-year-old kid. He just looks absolutely amazing out there. Electric. That move he made, just fantastic game. There's not much I could say. I do think Jalen Milroe right now is the front runner for Heisman. If Alabama keeps doing the things that they're doing, for me, Jalen Milroe is the front runner. Is there someone that can topple him right now? Well, I'll bring it back to where I started the show. Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. Now, let's put into context what Jeanty's season has looked like so far. Now, remember, I did mention when they played at FCS, that FCS opponent, I think it might have been Portland State, I'm not sure, that I thought they would leave him in to get some touchdowns. Well, it's going to be a shame if he comes up short of Barry Sanders' all-time record. Now, for those of you all that are not aware of this, at least the numbers, in 1988, Barry Sanders ran for 2,628 yards and scored 37 touchdowns in 11 games. They didn't count bowl stats as part of stats back then. But if you throw on his 222-yard, 5-touchdown bowl game performance, he ran for 2,850 yards and scored 42 touchdowns. Now, can Jeanty get that? Because I think that's the number he's got to beat. Forget about the regular season record. Just one full season, 2,850 and 42. Let me tell you what these numbers average up at. If you take Barry Sanders bowl game numbers and add them to his regular season 11 game totals in full point PPR leagues, he would have averaged 47.2 fantasy points per game that year if we were all playing college fantasy football back then. If you just take his 11 game season, his average is still 46.8 fantasy points per game. He was averaging 46.8 fantasy points per game in the 1988 regular season. That's what some of you guys get out of three running backs in some weeks. He was averaging 46.8 fantasy points per game. Through 4 games right now, Ashton Jeanty is averaging 42.6 fantasy points per game. Now, it sounds close, but 4 points per game is not close. Barry Sanders averaged 46.8 fantasy points per game. Ashton Jeanty, 42.6, which makes you wonder if Jeanty would have been playing that full game against that FCS opponent. My guess is that his average would be above Barry Sanders' average right now. But in another 3 or 4 weeks, you're going to start seeing a ticker and updates in Boise State's game if Ashton Jeanty is going to continue to average 211 rushing yards per game, which is what he's doing, and he's got 13 TDs through 4. Multiply that times 3. Right now, he's on pace to score 39 touchdowns, which would be more than Barry Sanders' regular season totals, and another 211. Add that on to where he's at. He can give it a run. We'll see how that shakes out. We'll be following it if nobody else is. But my guess is in about 3 or 4 weeks, if Jeanty's really posting some huge numbers, you're going to start seeing the countdown on him approaching Barry Sanders' numbers. And if he does come close, it'd be hard to not put him at the top of that Heisman list. But that's going to do it. That's my commentary about Barry Sanders' 1988 historic season and in context of what Ashton Jeanty's doing right now. We're getting some good football right now. The games have been absolutely fantastic to watch. We have a lot more great football, ahead of us. Tons of buys. Tons of bye weeks. Your roster depth is going to be challenged now more than ever. We're also getting to the point where the Tuesday night games are going to start. You're going to have to make some of these roster decisions even earlier. I just have to tell you, as a fan, I love college football on a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Thursday. As a content creator, it is a lot more difficult because we're going to have to do like we did last year, where we're going to have to put out projections for Tuesday, Wednesday only, because we won't have the full week projections out yet. So you'll have to make some of those roster decisions in the beginning of the week based on getting projections on only Tuesday and Wednesday games until all the other games get uploaded into the system. Just can't get them out that fast. So as far as content creation goes, Tuesday and Wednesday games are just a pain in the butt. As a fan, it's more college football, and we love it. But that's going to do it for this week's show. Week 5, short and sweet, good games, depth is tested. A lot of you guys, this is a very unique season, and I say that because I've mentioned names like Ollie Gordon, Byron Brown. We've had Caden Salta. I mean, I don't remember a season where arguably 3 of the top 4 preseason fantasy studs have really not done much up until this point, or has done very little. And what that's done is it's opened it up to everybody else who didn't get a chance to get one of those guys on the front end. So depth is tested. The waiver wire cures all ills. It's the greatest thing about college fantasy football is that you can swing and whiff in your drafts. The injury bug can bite, but you can rebuild, baby. You can rebuild. And that's college fantasy football. That's going to do it for the Week 5 show. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. We'll see you in Week 6.